Live from London, this is BBC News. Kamala Harris says the US presidential election is a choice between freedom and chaos at her first rally since becoming the presumptive Democratic nominee. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu prepares to address the US Congress as hundreds of activists protest against his visit. This is the scene in Taiwan as the country prepares for the imminent arrival of Typhoon Gemi. And in an exclusive interview, Janet Jackson tells the BBC how she taught herself to dance. Hello, I'm Karin Giannone. We start in the US, where Kamala Harris has said the presidential election in November is a choice between freedom and chaos. She was addressing her first campaign rally since gathering enough party support to become the Democratic nominee for president. Speaking in Wisconsin, which will be a crucial state to win if she wants to enter the White House, she accused her rival Donald Trump of wanting to take the country backward. It's been a strong start to the vice president's campaign. Her team says they've raised over $100 million in the 24 hours after Joe Biden ended his campaign. And new polling shows the vice president with a 2% lead over her Republican challenger, Donald Trump. Ms. Harris led Trump 44% to 42%. The poll was carried out in the days following Biden's exit from the race. With all the very latest, here's David Willis.
24 hours into her new role, and Kamala Harris was already on the verge of becoming the first black and Asian woman to win the presidential nomination of a major party. Her first event as presidential candidate, a visit to campaign headquarters, and from the former California prosecutor, a taste of how she intends to set about attacking Donald Trump.
Predators who abused women. Fraudsters who ripped off consumers, cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type. We have doors to knock on, we have people to talk to, we have phone calls to make, and we have an election to win.
She was joined remotely by the man whose departure from the race thrust her into the spotlight.
Joe, I know you're still on the call. And we've been talking every day. You guys heard it from Doug's voice. We love Joe and Jill. We really do. They truly are like family to us. And we do, everybody here does.
It's mutual.
I knew you were still there. You're not going anywhere, Joe.
I'm watching you, kid. I'm watching you, kid. I love you.
I love you, Joe. Oh.
Within hours, it was reported that Kamala Harris had secured the support of sufficient party delegates to ensure her nomination ahead of the Democratic convention, set to get underway on the 19th of August. Other candidates could, in theory, still emerge, triggering a contest over the presidential candidate, but that now seems increasingly unlikely. Assuming she is confirmed as the party's nominee, Kamala Harris will face Donald Trump on the 5th of November. A second-generation immigrant, Kamala Harris is the daughter of a Jamaican father and an Indian mother who moved to America in search of a better life. Prominent party figures such as Bill Clinton and the former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi are among those supporting her bid for the party's presidential nomination. Having relied on ridiculing Joe Biden over his age, her candidacy is prompting a reset for the Donald Trump campaign. His new running mate has settled on accusing her of covering up concerns about the president's health.
This is not okay, ladies and gentlemen. You cannot, for 3.5 years, take a guy who clearly didn't have the mental capacity to do the job. Kamala Harris lied about it. My Senate Democratic colleagues lied about it. The media lied about it. Every single person who saw Joe Biden knew that he wasn't capable of doing the job. And for 3 years, they said nothing until he became political dead weight. That is not a way to run a country. That is not a way to run a political party. That is an insult to voters.
Kamala Harris is not yet her party's candidate, but events are moving at breakneck speed. The prospect of her nomination has energised the Democrats' campaign, and they're hoping it will bring more of their supporters to the polls. David Willis, BBC News, Washington.
Well, more senior Democrats have thrown their support behind Kamala Harris to be the party's nominee for president. The Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, and the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, said they proudly endorsed Kamala Harris after Joe Biden ended his bid for re-election. Well, President Biden, who had been isolating with COVID, has now returned to the White House. He's due to give an address from the Oval Office later to discuss how he will spend his remaining months in office. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington, preparing to address a joint meeting of Congress later. It's his first trip since the attack by Hamas on October the 7th. It follows months of war and unsuccessful ceasefire negotiations. Mr. Netanyahu is due to meet President Biden on Thursday. Ahead of his address to Congress, police have been scaling up security measures and fencing around the Capitol building. Protests against Mr. Netanyahu's policies have already begun. These demonstrators have staged a sit-in at the Capitol to protest against the war in Gaza. Our correspondent, Tom Bateman, has more.
Well, as we showed up in this part of the building, there were still around 100 or so protesters on the floor of the rotunda here, some of them being led away by that stage, but others still here. The US Capitol Police had arrived in force by that point. They were cuffing them behind their backs, pulling people up and taking them away to be processed, being arrested one by one and moved outside of the building. One of the protesters I spoke to said that there were 500 American Jews from all over the US that had come here explicitly to protest Benjamin Netanyahu's visit. Now, when he is here in this joint address to Congress, his message will be around what he will call Israel being the indispensable ally in the Middle East to the United States, and also to thank Joe Biden for his support over the war in Gaza. But it is that very support that has led to this deep sense of division, not just within the Democratic Party, but of course across the United States, as we will see protest over the visit come to the very heart of Washington.
Tom Bateman in Washington. Well, let's stay with the Middle East because the United Nations says more than 150,000 people have fled Khan Yunis in southern Gaza since Monday. The Israeli army issued an evacuation order for parts of the city and reduced the size of Al-Mawazi. That's a designated humanitarian zone, claiming it was being used by Hamas fighters. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, said 80% of the Gaza Strip was now either under an evacuation order or labelled a no-go zone. Our special correspondent Fergal Keane has this report. A warning: there are distressing images throughout.
So many escaping in such a small place, chased by the war, in the heat and fear of 24 hours in Khan Yunis. A place of encounters such as these. Ayman al-Khawaji is running with a child. Not for a doctor. The child is past that, but to a mortuary. Who can accept that their son will be like that, he asks. Whose fault is it that their family is blown up? The IDF is back fighting in Khan Yunis because Hamas is resurgent here. Urban war where nowhere is safe. To the south in Rafah, Hamas attacking Israeli armour. Hit and run from inside houses. The days of war are now in their hundreds, and each day in Khan Yunis a breaking point for someone. The shattered hospital system is struggling with new wounded. Before the war, Sami Sulya, aged 4, and his sister Sila, who's 7. Here they are now in Nasser Hospital. Sila's legs are paralyzed. Sami has severe abdominal injuries.
The situation has been very difficult for me, with one child in intensive care and the other outside.
I asked an ally of Israel's Prime Minister to respond to international concern about the plight of wounded children in Gaza.
Priority for me, in parallel to humanitarian aid that I allow, is to bring back my hostages, including a baby.
The Jewish Bibas children, 4-year-old Ariel, 1-year-old Kafir, were taken hostage with their parents by Hamas. There are conflicting reports about whether they've survived.
You never ask us, how does Israel feel? How does Israel live with the fact that 2 of her little boys, we don't even know where they are? It's always about the kids on the other side. So I'll tell you something. If you really care about the kids on the other side, make sure that Israel win the war and Hamas does not reign in Gaza.
At Nasser Hospital, Ayman al-Kawaji leaves the mortuary, bearing the shrouded child to his grave, before night comes on, to cover the grieving and the dead. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Let's just bring you a line of breaking news from Nepal. There are reports that a plane has crashed on takeoff from Kathmandu airport with 19 people on board. It's believed to be a Saria Airlines plane taking off from Kathmandu International Airport. An unnamed Saria Airlines official speaking to the BBC said it was flying to Pokhara with around 17 of its own staff on board the plane, and the flight was not a regular passenger flight, but a Saria Airlines plane has crashed on takeoff from Kathmandu International Airport. 19 people believed to have been on board. We will bring you any updates we can as soon as we get them. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
An Israeli missile strike. Trump has been omnipresent.
It's the powerful synthetic substance, fentanyl.
Artificial intelligence.
Razor wire remains up.
Both sides will be willing to have a real conversation. There are new restrictions on border entry.
We're helping people get off this addiction.
Humanity owes the child the best it has to give.
My dad was a farmer, but he also had a radio talk show for farmers who called in with their farming problems. He'd patiently listen to every conflicting account of what was and wasn't working. That was really influential to how I approached my journalism. Building trust by taking the time to understand a situation clearly before reporting a story. In a 24-hour news cycle, patience can be so frustrating, but it's a crucial tool. I'm Lucy Hockings on BBC News Now.
A powerful typhoon with winds of up to 240 kilometres per hour is expected to hit Taiwan's northeast coast in the coming hours. Typhoon Gemi is being described as a very large and destructive storm, about the equivalent of a Category 4 hurricane. Flights have been cancelled, financial markets closed, and people given the day off work. Let's just show you some of the live pictures we've got coming in from Taiwan. You can see it's looking fairly calm still, but the country is bracing for that typhoon. Let's talk to our correspondent Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, who's in Taipei. A little bit more stormy where you are, Rupert. Just tell us the impact this is already having on daily life.
Yeah, we're just starting to feel the front edge of the typhoon as it comes towards the capital here, Taipei. It's made landfall on the east coast in the last hour or so, the outer edges of Typhoon Gemi, which is about 50 miles or about 70 kilometres in that direction over the mountains behind me here. As the afternoon goes on, the front edge is expected to move over the mountains and arrive here in the capital, Taipei. We're already, as you're seeing, getting quite a lot of wind, quite a lot of rain, but that is going to intensify quite a lot in the next few hours. This is a big storm. It's packing very strong winds, but I think the big worry is not so much the winds as the amount of rain it is carrying. According to the meteorological authorities here in Taipei, they're saying it could drop between 1,000 and 2,000 millimetres of rain into the central mountains of Taiwan in the next 24 hours. And that's, that's just such a massive amount of rain that it will pretty much certain to cause some flash flooding, perhaps landslides and things like that. And that's the real worry from the storm, is the more remote communities, the townships up in the mountains that could be cut off by landslides and by flash flooding.
Well, indeed, Rupert. I mean, those people who are in more remote areas are particularly vulnerable. What's the advice for them to do?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, here in Taipei, I have to say, although the streets are pretty empty and everybody's off today, people have been told to stay home, financial markets, schools are closed. I mean, the mood here is very calm. People are just sort of hunkering down in their homes and waiting for the storm to come through tonight. But out in the mountains, people are being advised to evacuate their homes, to go to local evacuation centres. Those are things like schools, community centres, or government buildings that are made of, strong materials that can withstand destructive winds and are in places that are not likely to get flooded. And so we understand that several thousand places that are not likely to get flooded. And so we understand that several thousand people have been told already to evacuate from places in the mountains, and hopefully they are doing that. This is an area that was hit by a very large earthquake back in April. And there are some fears that, of course, that earthquake unleashed a lot of landslides, and it will have loosened the geology, and that, you dump a lot of rain on top of that, you could get even more landslides as well. So there is real concern. Taiwan is well prepared for these sorts of storms. This is the first one this year. Oh, and you can see, there we go, big gust of wind. But it is very well prepared, and there are thousands of troops on standby to go in and help out if communities in the mountains do get cut off.
Rupert, keep safe. We'll speak to you over the forthcoming hours. Thanks very much. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, feeling the beginning of the storm there in Taipei. The UK government is honouring the Ukrainian athletes who have died in the conflict with Russia with a new display that will be unveiled at Parliament Square in London today. The war has already claimed the lives of at least 487 Ukrainian athletes, though the true number is likely to be even higher, with only 140 athletes from Ukraine competing at this year's Olympic Games in Paris. This marks the smallest representation ever in Ukraine's Summer Olympic history. Well, let's go over to our reporter Olga Malchevska, who's in Parliament Square. Olga, tell us why they've come here today.
We're here at the Parliament Square, where we can see that huge number in Ukrainian colors. So 487, that is how many Ukrainian athletes have been killed during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And here we can see also in black those symbols of Ukrainian athletes who have lost their lives in this war. And this installation is organized by the UK government. They worked together in collaboration with the Ukraine's sporting committee to fact check. And what we don't know is how many of those athletes had to give up their dreams, how many of them are injured. And there are so many questions still to be answered here. And with me is now here Petro Revlyuk, right? Revko, Petro Revko, thank you very much, who is the chair of Ukrainian Association of the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain. Thank you very much for finding time. And why is it so special for you to be here today?
Well, we are proud and very honoured to be here as this reminder to people that although the Paris Olympics will start later this week, there are some athletes that will not be able to make those Olympics due to giving their lives to defend Ukraine against Russia's aggression.
And you here have been helping Ukrainian refugees who have arrived to the UK, and how many of them have arrived here, and what kind of help have you provided to them?
They're estimated at 280,000 throughout England, Scotland and Wales. We've helped with support and worked with the UK government on the Homes for Ukraine scheme. We've opened our 36 community centres up and down the country as hubs and welcome centres for the refugees to help signpost them, help them settle into the UK for this temporary time they're going to be here before they return to Ukraine when Ukraine wins the war.
Thank you very much. And what do you think should be done? What else should be done here?
Well, I think we cannot stress how much we appreciate how much the UK government has done to date. And all we ask for is that continued 100% support from the UK government and the UK people, who have always also been very supportive to Ukrainian refugees that have arrived in the UK.
Thank you very much. That was Petro, who is the chair of the Association of Ukrainians here in the UK. And we were speaking also to one of the Ukrainian athletes, Oksana, who has been here today as well, sharing her story and telling us about how dramatic it is for her. Unfortunately, she has lost lots of her fellows, her sportsmen who have been training with her, and we will be hearing more about Ukrainians here from the Ukrainians here in the UK, and also we will be speaking to the UK government and the representatives of the United States government who have been helping with this installation as well.
Okay, Olga, thank you very much. Olga Malchevska there in central London. Now, a public inquiry in New Zealand has found that a third of all children, young people and vulnerable adults in state and religious care over the past 70 years experienced some form of abuse. The report described the scale as unimaginable, with 200,000 people affected. Victims told the inquiry they'd been raped, sterilised or given electric shocks, among other abuses. Those from the Indigenous Maori community and people with disabilities were particularly affected. New Zealand's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon's described the findings as a dark and sorrowful day. Well, let's speak to former Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand under the Ardern government, Grant Robertson. Grant Robertson, thank you very much for joining us. I mean, first of all, your reaction.
Yeah, look, this is a report that has been a long time coming. Survivors of abuse have been asking for decades for this kind of inquiry, and when we were in government, we established it. Like all New Zealanders, I'm reading this today with, I guess, a great sense of shame, of an appreciation of the depth of hurt that's felt by survivors, and I think also with a desire that we now, make good on what is a horrific situation.
Just to remind us a little about how we got here and the role that you've played in this. I mean, when you were Deputy Prime Minister, you were the one who called the Royal Commission, which led to this inquiry. To what extent did you become aware of what had been going on?
For me, it began actually in my role as a constituency member of Parliament, where I was approached by survivors who felt that their cases were simply not being heard and that the scale of systemic abuse was not understood. And that has led me effectively on about a 15-year journey working with the survivors who, I've got to say, have shown the most extraordinary courage through this process. When we did get into government in 2017, we committed to a Royal Commission. Many governments had been asked for that, but had not done it. We felt it was the right thing to do, and led by Jacinda Ardern as Prime Minister, we, within our first 100 days, announced the Commission. It's been a heavy load since then. Not only is abuse in state care covered, but also by religious institutions as well. There have been thousands of submissions and hearings, and a very thorough process that's taken a long time. But the report that we've now got, I think, justifies doing a Royal Commission, and finally, I hope, makes survivors feel that they've been heard.
Just in one sentence, what do you expect the impact of this report to be? Very briefly, if you will.
I think it will have an enormous impact, but what I really hope is that it makes the lives of survivors and their families far better in the future, and that our care system in New Zealand takes the lessons and makes sure nothing like this ever happens again.
Grant Robertson, former Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, Janet Jackson's one of the best-selling artists of all time, with more than 180 million records sold worldwide and a string of hits that have left a lasting impression on pop culture. Ahead of her Together Again tour coming to the UK later this year, she caught up with our music correspondent Mark Savage.
4, 3, 2, 1.
She is known for her dancing, but Janet Jackson is entirely self-taught. She says that's because of a harrowing experience in ballet class when she was 4.
I've got a booty. So she would say that I'm not tucking my butt enough, and she hit me. I was young, I was little.
A second attempt at taking classes in her teens also went wrong.
I was about to shoot an episode of Different Strokes, and I remember telling my instructor that, my teacher, and he got a little too close to me, and I felt very, very uncomfortable. And I remember coming out of the class and telling mother, and she said, "That's it, you're not going back."
As an adult, Janet channeled experiences like those into strong and confident songs like Nasty. But even in the music industry, she received pushback from male executives.
What were the barriers you came up against?
Being told no, more than once. Saying why? Because you're a girl. You can't do that. Girls don't do that. And it's like, well, why not? It's like, well, somebody's got to. Well, what's wrong with trying it? Let's just try it and see what happens. But eventually, you stick in there long enough, you find a way to get your way.
By sticking to her guns, she sold more than 100 million records. But Janet says her proudest achievement is becoming a mum 7 years ago.
The most beautiful thing, I was so thankful God allowed me to have this experience, this journey in my life. And I love every single minute of it.
Her career has had its ups and downs, but right now, she's in the middle of her most successful tour to date.
You sing Scream every night. That must be very emotional, to celebrate your brother in that way.
Yeah. You know, it's listening to him every night, sing and remembering us. Once again in New York, Mike and I wrote that song in his apartment. The emotion and what he was going through at that time, and just me being his little sister, always being by his side and being that support system. You know what I mean? And that's always been my role.
And you still do some of the dance routines from those old videos. Do people in the audience do them back at you?
Are you kidding me? Yes. I see them doing Miss You Much. I see them doing a lot of stuff. And also dressed like me.
I can only do the one, which is just the countdown.
The Rhythm Nation,
Yeah.
that one too.
Should we do it together?
Yeah.
Go on. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You did it very well.
Thank you.
Mark Savage, BBC News.
I'm Karin Giannone in London. Stay with us here on BBC News.
Are you certain that's just the wind? Mm-hmm. Are you for imprint certain?
Certainty matters. When you order promo products for your next event, you'll need to be absolutely certain they arrive on time. That's why you choose 4imprint. Experts who'll get it done right, delivered on time, guaranteed. Count on certainty at 4imprint.com.
4imprint for certain.
There's already a lot of speculation over the cladding used on the facades here and what role it played.
Very strategic position for M23 or any armed militia to be able to access either Sake or Goma.
This is what sets Taiwan apart. Proud of their democracy, who fear China like never before.
This is the government and paramilitary forces that are lobbing tear gas onto farmers that are protesting here.
When you're this close to the river, which is a front line, you are always watched through drones in the sky or from the Russians themselves, so you have to move quickly.
There when the story breaks. BBC News.
This is the one who helps everyone stay safe. An unsung hero in a building full of everyday heroes is just how he likes it. The industrial-grade products you need. Call, click, or stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
The future is already here, and it's a pretty impressive sight.
May the best driver win.
Now look, this is a pretty big deal. The latest developments from the world of tech.
A flipping burger robot.
Click on BBC News.
The headlines this morning, the Metropolitan Police says it's investigating possible fraud linked to the IT scandal, which led to the conviction of hundreds of sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses.
From the age of 13, my childhood was gone. It was non-existent.
It all happened in whispers. It all happened like stigma. It all happened by pointing fingers. And we had no explanation. That was the problem.
It's the biggest miscarriage of justice in a generation, which dozens of journalists have exposed.
In this programme, in the midst of a public inquiry into what went on, I'm going to meet people who are still dealing with the fallout of being involved in the post office scandal.
We were spat at, paint stripper poured on my car. It just felt as though it was one thing after another.
It means coming to terms with decades of trauma. But across the country, people are trying to move on, to reclaim their lives.
So if you walked up there past your house now, how would that make you feel? You couldn't do it? Really? Really? Wow.